Good morning from Athens. I'm Maria Vidali. I'm an architect and researcher from Greece, and I'm very glad that at least I will participate in this conference through this video. And I would also be very, very glad if I receive your questions in my email, vidalimaria@gmail.com. The title of my presentation today and research is Narrative, Metaphor, Fiction, How Might They Serve Architectural Education? The methodology developed in this paper wishes to focus on an aspect of the crisis facing architecture today, the loss of novelty and the search for a highly technological, sustainable function of architecture, yet still disconnected from humanity and environmental reality. Through this methodology, place can be perceived and understood through various versions of reality. In this way, the role of architecture behind a built work can be interpreted as the outcome of a wider complexity of life. I would like to introduce this methodology with an expert of a fictional narrative. It is one of the 8 fictional narratives that gave form to my PhD work on liminality, metaphor, and place in the farming landscape of Tinos, the village of Campos. It was derived from research involving land contracts and documents, interviews with the villagers, and personal experience. My water. When the wedding guests and villagers had departed to go honor the party of the newly wedded couple, peace reigned in the streets of the village. At nightfall, the public lights switched on. There were only 3 dark figures moving silently in the village streets. They passed by the Choreftra, local square, then the new square moved towards Holy Trinity's church, and walked hastily to the south end of the village. They didn't speak or use any lights. They were headed to Messaria and made their way towards Iosif's father's fields and the spring. Iosif was among them. Keeping his voice low but speaking quickly, he started giving instructions to the other 2. That night, with all the villagers attending the wedding celebration, Iosif had decided to block the water flow with wood and stones at different points in the gully as it descended towards Loutra. This way, it would flow unequally into the properties and cause discontent and arguments among the villagers. He thought that this would make everyone feel the way he felt about the loss of his water. The water was cold, and the steep gully surrounded by big stones and rocks made their work even more difficult in the darkness. Despite the blackness of the night and the unfriendliness of the gully, where wild plants and cold water discouraged this act, Iosif managed, using torches and hiding his anger, to execute his devilish plan. After an hour, the only thing that could be heard from the water of the spring falling in the gully and filling the small dams that Iosif and his accomplices had created. The water of the spring will have to travel much longer to reach the village of Loutra. Sunday morning found the villagers of Campos in despair. A big flash and then a clap of thunder announced the weather of the village before the news on TV. Every farmer's heart started to pound hard. They knew that the gully had been blocked. The rain started to fall endlessly, becoming heavier as it passed, and the thunderbolt didn't encourage anyone to leave home and go check. The memory of old Barbayanis, found burned in his mule by a thunderbolt many years ago, held everyone at home. The first light reached Campos at 6:25 a.m. and found most of the farmers already at the fields in Messaria. Chaos. That's disaster. Manolis hardly managed to mutter. Panagia mu, exclaimed Nicholas, holding his head. Hiding his face, tears started to run from Manolis' eyes when he saw his sheep drifted by the water. The water had destroyed the boundary walls of his field and had drowned them further down in the gully. This story is set in Campos, a village of 65 inhabitants on the Greek island of Tinos in the Aegean Sea, which boasts a long history of agriculture. In Campos, one of the oldest farming villages of Tinos, the boundaries created by low stone walls and alleyways primarily define the farming landscape that permits village life and its structure. The topography of the village is outlined by place and time, through seasonal changes, family life, farming, communal and religious life. Though fictional, this excerpt is rooted in a specific area, a place of the island and the world, and is an interpretation of it. It allows for an understanding of the village territory, which also touches on areas of historical, ethnographical, and anthropological studies. It is explained through the village leaf vein structure, composed by the main street and branching alleys that lead out to the fields. There is an undeniable hierarchy emanating from the church and religion, animals, farming, the family. At the same time, there is also a constant metamorphosis of village life through these hierarchies. This happens in respect to the places established by the boundaries of communal and private properties, as well as the time schedules related to habits and customs. This excerpt belongs to one out of 8 fictional narratives about life in Campos. It is accompanied with a thorough interpretation based on the meaning of property, water, community, conflict, the need for order, and coexistence with nature. It is also followed by the kind of awareness defined by Emmons, Fernstein, Dyer, and Finney. The awareness that drawing-like storytelling exists across the ambiguous dimension of reality and fiction. Architects actively construe stories while drawing, and the ways these stories are constructed are inseparable from the way a project is designed. The book Confabulations, Storytelling in Architecture illustrates Foscari's exploration of architecture as an art that seeks an expansion of architectural potential, integrating poetry and technique so as to engender, it may be hoped, fabulous buildings. Research on and composition of the methodology. The methodology presented above is implemented in the village life and landscape of a specific case study, that of the farming landscape of the Greek island of Tinos. Initially, the boundaries revealed through text, old and contemporary contracts, space, movement, and habits were explored. These boundaries created a series of liminal spaces. In this work, the term liminality inherently possesses the characteristics and connotations attributed to liminal spaces in architecture, i.e. spaces that represent areas or rather situations allowing for different coexisting levels of interaction, which are both ambiguous and transformable through negotiation. This may also imply communication, conflict, or agreements, including a metaphor of what a space can signify in different situations of the villagers or people's everyday life. Language consists in communal metaphors, stories, and fictional beliefs that bind and unite a small community within a farming landscape. This community still retains a quality of life closely connected with nature, architecture, the private and public realm, all by exhibiting features that can be found in a present-day way of living. How this methodology was implemented on a specific case study, theoretical and philosophical framework. Initially, the research on the case study of a traditional village was based on archival work that gave me the opportunity to review the contracts and testaments available. They concerned the island's land and water ownership and helped me become aware of different values and principles, which were also components of a special manner of imagining and perceiving reality. Additionally, later on, the proceedings of the community government representatives demonstrated how the concept of the community developed through political and social issues, issues of communal and municipal ownership, as well as private land and water, issues that needed to be addressed. Therefore, land, water, air, the fire of conflict, love stories, the communal against the foreign, all become agencies of dwelling and ownership through special, bodily, ethical, social, and emotional boundaries. My approach was influenced by the seminal work of French philosopher Ricoeur, who describes the world of the text as a spatial, temporal world of the relationship between universal time and historical time, and thus mediated by the places of memory in the same way as relationship between geometric space and inhabited space is mediated by the stories inscribed in these places of memory. I also developed an understanding of the importance of meaningful regionalism emerging through traces, histories, testimonies, and an authentic dialogue as described by Pérez Gómez. A dialogue where the word as part of a story, as he describes, gives meaning and has the purpose of viewing a space of experience, a cosmic or historical world, whichever may be the cultural inheritance of the architect, and the horizon of expectations, the projections of the architect's imagination for a better future for the common good. By adopting fiction through the use of phenomenology and hermeneutics, my intention is to reveal another architectural dialogue based on language, words, and narrative as a new space of experience. Fictional narratives were created out of the villagers' stories, their spaces, their living with animals, the life they have together. However, the plot of these narratives and the story excerpt in the introduction are imaginary. I therefore became fully aware of Ricoeur's argument about how words in a sentence can reveal a discourse in the world, giving language the function of creating images. I also became aware of the poetic metaphor connected to our body in the form of feeling according to Spitzer. And the act of reading, which will finalize the work, will enrich it with new interpretations and further allow it to be reinterpreted in the new historical contexts. Why narrative, metaphor, and fiction? This case study, the small community, the village of Campos, helped me develop a perception of what life is like in the spatial and social complexity of their village architecture. I believe that this could not have happened only by tracing huge architectural drawings, following up studies and architectural descriptions of the village's architecture, or adjusting and studying anthropological references. Through the narratives associated either with the reality of the village or the imaginary world of its inhabitants, I realized the value of metaphor as a natural language of sharing a communal way of living inextricably linked to the natural and built environment. Stories connect language with the mimetic action, the habit, which in turn connects our physical and mental experience with environment, place, and space. I adopted the fictional narrative in order to discover and reveal the truth through fiction, story, myth, as proposed by Ricoeur. Through the mediating role of fiction as a weaving procedure of the different things that make up life, this complexity of life is what narrative is trying to imitate. Hermeneutics, anthropology, and philosophy are used to approach place from different perspectives and provide another version of its reality through the story's interpretation. During the last year, this methodology helped me to teach a contemporary urbanism course, using the city of Athens as a case study. Coming from American universities and visiting Athens for the very first time, the students received information about the history of the city, theories on its specific, urban, and social issues, and the methodology as described above. Local narratives organized field trips to certain areas of a specific historical, urban, and social interest, interviews with the locals allow them to gain experience and formulate their own understanding of the city. This was revealed through their own fictional narratives as a composition of their historical, social, ethical, spatial, and urban perception of a city that they had never been to before. The same methodology was used with students of architecture during the last semester at the University of Thessaly in Greece, in the framework of the course Understanding and Imagination Before Designing. Based on the traditional architecture of a village, the course seeks answers on what a young architect should know beyond the structure of a building, and more particularly on how he or she could understand the complexity of life in order to analyze an existing spatial and social situation in depth before designing. Tools of interpretation were given through different approaches so that architecture could be understood as a practice that is traditionally used to connect man with his community, place, religion, and environment. In both cases, reality took form through a fictional, imaginary plot which helped them anchor their experience. Why this methodology is important as a paradigm for design studio education. Conclusion. Through this methodology and the study of the village of campus, a different way of life and spatial understanding was revealed to me. This is of particular importance at a time when architects, planners, and design professionals are focusing on ecological and cultural architectural sustainability, struggling to find novel and ever more efficient solutions. Despite the changes dictated by external imperatives, these ways of life and spatial understanding in the village, though dating back to a time-long past, continue to contribute to a healthy and fulfilling lifestyle today, both in terms of physiology and the psyche, so extending from the private sphere to the public realm, bringing together the meaning of narrative, imagination, and interpretation as practiced in the village of campus, its public and private realm, but also its landscape. I experienced how semantic innovation, also mentioned by Perez Gomez as the linguistic hermeneutic imagination, allows us to search for the relationship between tradition and innovation, an element indispensable to the proper social functioning of architecture. Imagination appears common both to language in the form of narrative, fiction, story, and architecture. In this work, metaphor, narrative, and fiction are presented as tools for architects towards a broader understanding of what the world that we design for really is. They are introduced as an escape from the preoccupation of what this world should be according to contemporary social and political commandments, since urban rules do not reflect a deep understanding of the reality of a place either. Metaphor, narrative, and fiction allow for different, more grounded versions of reality to emerge. They equip architects with a way to interpret the local tradition or urban structure into a contemporary way of living and innovation without responding to architecture and dwelling through form and fashion. Instead, they force them to tap more into the social and ethical function of architecture, a meaningful regionalism related with humans in the environment. Thank you.